Fully
my
familiar
point.
with should I seek 100% certainty that those folks are not going to find new jobs? Should I assume that if we ban certain known carcinogens from baby mattresses, that will make fewer baby mattresses in America, and therefore we'll have people out of work in the baby mattress manufacturing industry? I mean, we vote on laws all the time without 100% scientific certainty that they are going to lead to the greater good. We make assumptions. We read the science as well as we can when science is relevant. We read the economics as well as we can. And then often we find ourselves in a position of some uncertainty. When the uncertainty is about whether a chemical that has been proved to be carcinogenic should be in mother's breast milk because they're being exposed to it, should be puffing out of our baby mattresses, should be in our furniture in our homes. And what we're being told is that if you can't prove that that particular chemical caused a rising incidence of a certain cancer because there are other chemicals that your industry is also making that also may be the cause, or there are other environmental factors that perhaps haven't been identified, and you say, therefore, we can't find certainty. I'm an attorney, too, and I've been in a situation where we're trying to assess causation for a particular chemical causing a particular harm. And you know, as an attorney, that is extraordinarily difficult. So to suggest that that's the standard, that we ought to have some level of certainty that this particular harm is caused by this particular chemical, we wouldn't regulate much if that was the standard.
And if I may, again, based on the weight of the evidence standard, when you look at the overall evidence that's on human health, there are also other elements at play. You alluded to exposure, and I think it's important to take exposure into account. When you look at whether something causes cancer or not, you have to not only take into account the potential that it causes cancer, but how much exposure do you need to that substance in order to actually have cancer effect? And I think that's also where the dialogue gets somewhat complicated, because I know you're alluding to a substance that causes cancer, but I think the question is, it's been demonstrated to cause cancer at extremely high levels that maybe are not reflective of exposures that we see in day-to-day life. And so that discussion is very difficult to have in simplistic terms, but I think from this industry's perspective, it's one that's critical, because if you don't take exposure into account, you can't make a real assessment.
I'm not suggesting you obviously take exposure into account. What I'm saying is, when you say that conversation is difficult, what you're really saying is it is extraordinarily difficult to have a conversation where the conclusion is that causation is very likely. And I would ask you, if I think there's a 25% chance that a particular chemical is increasing rates of fatal cancer, the 25% chance, 75% chance that's not happening. Should we continue to permit that? Does that meet your weight of the evidence standard?
I'm not sure. It's hard to say, but I
got
to tell you, the weight of the evidence would look at, does it cause cancer at certain exposure levels? And if you look at exposures that happen in real life, and you can demonstrate that.
With all due respect, you would ask, because you're not answering my question. You would not ask, does it cause cancer if you're a scientist? You would ask, is it likely to increase the risk of cancer? You wouldn't say, does it definitely increase the risk of cancer? You wouldn't say it has to quadruple the risk of cancer before you would say that there is evidence that there's a health effect. Evidence does not have to be binary, either yes, it causes cancer, it doesn't. So it doesn't seem to me that the question you would ask is, does it cause cancer?
Actually, you would.
You would ask, is it likely to cause cancer in some circumstances?
No, I think you'd ask, is there the potential to cause cancer?
No, the potential to cause cancer. So you're right. Right. So we're agreeing. You wouldn't ask, does it cause cancer? You would ask, is there the potential to cause cancer?
And if so, at what exposure levels would you need to be exposed to in order to have that?
And how high is the potential?
Meaning, what do you mean potential?
You would want to know. I mean, there's the potential that I'm going to win the lottery today if I bought a ticket.
Right.
It's pretty
That's
unlikely.
Right.
If you have them.
That's exactly right.
So what we should be looking for as government, to get back to, and this is a long route to this, but we should not be looking for proof that it causes a particular injury. We should be looking for a likelihood that if you expose the entire population at a level we expect, that putting these chemicals out into the marketplace would expose the entire population, recognizing that there are variable levels of exposure, presumably recognizing that there are variable levels of people's susceptibility to this particular chemical. If we think that putting this product out on the market is going to cause substantial health effects, possibly fatal health effects in some fraction of the population, even if we can't prove that with certainty, we should consider banning that chemical. Is that a fair, I mean, is that a statement you folks agree with? I know it's a little more nuanced than the high bar we talked about earlier.
It was a little difficult following your logic, but I think I go back to my example that I said earlier, that in terms of our system, there is a certain amount of acceptable risk, and you may not have been in the room when I use this example. When I fly,
I was in the room when you heard
okay.
that, and I'm glad there's a Federal Aviation Administration that takes that operates, if anything, on an extraordinarily high level of precautionary
principle. Well, you just heard
principle.
my example about the Consumer Safety Commission. They took a more precautionary approach on something that some of the experts disagreed with. So it depends on the agency, and you were in the room when I talked about that, right?
Yes.
Oh,
Should the FAA not, I mean, I fly sometimes too, incredible range of regulations. The seat cushions have to float. Should they have to prove that somebody might not float on something else if they end up in the water before requiring that the seat cushions float? Have to find an instance where someone drowned because their seat cushion didn't float? Or do you want them to take that kind of precaution when you're getting on a plane?
Well, no, again, that is part of, I think, the acceptable risk that we all take, that there is that your example is a very real possibility. Does that mean that we don't use any flotation because there's a possibility that one person out of 1,000 flying isn't going to be able to float? No, that is the acceptable risk that we take flying.
So, but again, the chair mentioned when you get on a plane, you probably take some comfort in the fact that there is a regulatory agency that is considering an extraordinarily wide range of risks and making some educated guesses about who can fly planes and who can't fly planes, and how the planes should be designed, and how frequently they should be maintained, without scientific proof necessarily that each of those individual choices of government to intervene in that market are necessarily going to save lives. They're making some sophisticated analyses, they're making some guesses, and at the end of the day, we have extraordinarily high levels of safety in our airline industry as a result. It seems to many of us that we have extraordinarily low levels of safety in our chemical industry, and we have rising incidents of various things that many of us believe could only be caused by environmental factors, probably resulting from chemicals of some sort that are in circulation. And it's true that we can't necessarily say chemical A is causing harm B, but we can say that chemical A is likely to be carcinogenic. We can say it is an endocrine disruptor. We can say it is in fact altering the brain chemistry of both people and animals that are exposed to it at levels that they'd be expected to expose to it. And it's very hard to believe that we should take all of that and conclude that the upshot is we should be banning only 5 chemicals. There were about 60,000 on that list originally. There are 20,000 more have been added over the course of 35 or so years. And it's very hard to believe that at the end of the day we're getting the levels of causation and the level of precaution correct.
If I may, very quickly, and then hopefully this addresses some of that. But California, I'm just going to use an example that's a flame retardant example. California looked at under Prop 65 TDCP and decided to add it to its list of carcinogens under Prop 65. You're all, I'm sure, aware of that. California recently announced what is called a no significant risk level, which essentially is a level of exposure to a substance below which there is no health concern. So even the state of California admits that there are levels of substances, even that may cause cancer, under which consumers are safe. So I would just say that that's something to keep in mind. Also, I think it's important to realize that this is a global industry, so if you're critical of EPA, Many of these same substances are reviewed by the EU. They're reviewed in Japan.
Right, and frequently banned in a situation
Well,
where
that's
they're
not
not banned here.
actually that's actually not true. Again, to TDCP, there's an excellent EU risk assessment that was conducted on TDCP. I'd be happy to share with you that concludes when looking at cancer that it's safe for consumer use, and I can share that with you.
I don't want to belabor this much longer, but
Okay.
just there are not chemicals that are banned in the EU that are still available in the United States.
No, I wasn't saying. I wasn't making that comparison.
Okay, I'm sorry. You just said it was when I said frequently they're banned in other places.
Well,
you told me that
I don't
wasn't
think
true.
it's frequently. but
Okay,
I think
all right. I appreciate that. And we're just all right. Different degrees. Thank you, and thank you very much for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.